we can start. Hello, everyone. Before we jump into the slides, I just want to thank you all for joining us today. And if this is your first session, welcome. And if you've been with us in session one, we're glad to have you back for more. And just a couple of quick notes before we begin. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be available afterward on our YouTube channel, including session one. And if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll have time for Q&A at the end. And before we get started, just a quick word about us. Silk Technologies is a chromatography company based in Chicago. We've been designing innovative HPLC columns, developing advanced mini HPLC instruments for over 20 years. And in addition to our product, we offer free custom HPLC method development and technical support tailored to your specific needs. So if you're working on a tough separation or need guidance with method development, just please don't hesitate to reach out. We're always happy to help. So I'll go ahead and share my screen now, and we'll get. Welcome everyone to the second session in our HPLC webinar series, Mastering HPLC Fundamentals, Introduction to Method Development and Optimization. My name is Jovana Mitrovic, and I'm R&D chemist at Silk Technologies. I'm excited to have you with us today as we dive deeper into the core aspects of HPLC. And in today's session, we'll build on the fundamentals we covered previously and dive into the core concepts of HPLC system, explore elution strategies, and discuss factors that influence performance. We'll also introduce HPLC method development process, which will be our primary focus in session 4. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we jump into today's content, let's just take a quick moment to recap what we covered in the previous session. We explored what chromatography is and why it's used, focusing specifically on HPLC. We reviewed core chromatographic concepts such as retention, selectivity, efficiency, and resolution, and examined different separation mechanisms used in HPLC. We also introduced mixed mode chromatography and discussed how these techniques are applied in real-world scenarios. Here is what we'll cover in today's session. We'll start by reviewing the key HPLC hardware components, how each part contributes to successful separations. Then we'll compare isocratic and gradient elution, when to use each, and how they affect your results. We also look at how to select the right column and mobile phase based on your analytes properties. And finally, we'll introduce the method development process, which is a critical part of HPLC practice. This session will serve as a foundation for that topic, which we'll explore in depth during the next webinar. So let's begin by looking at the flow and sample introduction components of an HPLC system. The pump is essential. It delivers the mobile phase at a controlled and consistent flow rate and pressure. You'll typically see two types: isocratic, which maintains a single mobile phase composition, and gradient, which dynamically mixes the solvents for more complex separations. A degasser is often integrated into the system to remove dissolved gases from solvents. And this step helps prevent bubbles and ensure smooth baseline, and especially important for sensitive detections. The injector then introduces your sample into the system. And this can be done either manually using a loop injector or automatically using an auto sampler, which is ideal for higher throughput labs. So key consideration here include the injection volume, which is typically between 1 to 100 microliters, and the precision of injection, both of which they directly impact the peak shape and quantification accuracy. Now let's move on the core functions of separation, detection, and data collection. The column is truly the heart of HPLC. It's where the separation happens. Columns vary in length, diameter, particle size, and stationary phase chemistry. And choosing the right one is critical, and we'll talk more about that shortly. Temperature control here is also important for improving reproducibility. So many systems come with a column oven, which you can use to control your temperature throughout the run. After the separation occurs, the detector comes into play. So for example, UV-Vis detectors are most common, and they work great for compounds that absorb light. Other detectors include refractive index, mass spectrometry, and others. And we'll go into details on those in a moment. So finally, we have data system that manages everything: instrument control, chromatogram visualization, peak integration, and results reporting. And basically, good software helps streamline workflows and ensures accuracy and traceability. Let's now take a closer look at different types of HPLC detectors and how to choose the right one for your application. UV-Vis detectors, for example, are our workhorses, ideal for compounds that absorb UV and visible light, something like aromatics or conjugated systems. We also have something like refractive index detectors. They're universal, but less sensitive. They're great for compounds that don't absorb UV, like sugars or alcohols, but they're very sensitive to temperature changes and not ideal for gradient methods. On the other hand, we have LSD, or evaporative light scattering detectors, that work well for detecting non-volatile compounds like lipids or polymers. They're not dependent on UV activity and are great when dealing with analytes that lack chromophores. Conductivity detectors are useful for ionic species like salts or acids. They're less sensitive, and we have more advanced systems for that, such as, for example, mass spec, which is unmatched to sensitivity to any of these detectors. We also have charged aerosol detectors, or CAD, which offer near universal detection and better sensitivity and reproducibility than LSD, for example, and they're also gradient compatible. And lastly, we have mass spectrometry, just provides unmatched sensitivity and selectivity, and it's especially useful for very complex samples and unknowns. So basically, when selecting a detector, always consider your analyte properties and the compatibility with your mobile phase. And we have just like a small figure here on the right, which shows from the least sensitive detectors, such as conductivity, to mass spec, our most sensitive detector that we can use with our HPLC systems. Now let's talk about columns, often referred to as the heart of HPLC system. The column's dimensions, its length, internal diameter, and particle size all influence pressure, resolution, and analysis time. Of course, stationary phase chemistry is critical. For example, we have reverse phase, which is most widely used, and it's best for hydrophobic compounds. We have polar columns where we use normal phase. They work well for polar analytes. Ion exchange, for example, is ideal for charged species, and mixed mode columns combine just different interactions in one, offering versatile selectivity. Next, particle size also plays a big role. Smaller particles improve resolution and speed, but they generate more back pressure. Larger particles reduce pressure, but may compromise separation. Also, temperature control is another important factor. Higher temperatures often speed up analysis, but may reduce resolution. So a stable column temperature helps ensure reproducibility across runs. Choosing the right column is one of the most important steps in method development, and it starts with understanding your analyte's chemical characteristics. The goal is to match the stationary phase to the type of interactions your analyte will undergo: hydrophobic, ionic, polar, or combination of these. The visual flow chart on the slide helps guide this decision-making process. So let's just begin with a basic question. For example, is the analyte hydrophobic? If the answer is yes, the next question is, does the analyte carry a charge? If no, a reverse phase column is usually a good starting point. If yes, then mixed mode columns are often the best choice, especially for more complex analytes that require multiple interaction mechanisms. If the analyte is, for example, hydrophilic or polar, then normal phase or helic columns might be more appropriate, particularly if strong retention of very polar molecules is needed. Now, what if your analyte is charged, such as an acid base? That's when ion exchange columns become useful. Use cation exchange column for positively charged analytes, or use anion exchange columns for negatively charged analytes. For complex analytes, those that are partially, let's say, ionic, partially hydrophobic, or that do not retain well on traditional phases, mixed mode columns provide a powerful solution. These columns combine two or more retention mechanisms, so we can have, for example, reverse phase plus ion exchange in a single column, just giving you more control over selectivity and separation. In fact, in many cases, mixed mode column can be just like highly versatile option because it operates to multiple modes at the same time. So the key takeaway, don't choose a column just because it's popular. Start with the chemistry. Ask yourself what functional groups are present. Is the analyte, for example, aromatic? Is it ionizable? Then select a column that offers the right kind of interaction. Strong enough to retain, but not too strong that elution becomes, for example, impossible, right? So this targeted approach to column selection saves time, improves meta robustness, leads to more reliable results overall. Now, let's talk about one of the most critical and sometimes overlooked aspects of HPLC, choosing the right mobile phase. Your mobile phase must be matched to the mode of separation you're using, whether that's reverse phase, ion exchange, normal phase, or mixed mode. Think of it this way. The mobile phase is not just a solvent, it's an active participant in the separation. If your mobile phase isn't compatible with your stationary phase or your analyte's chemistry, your separation won't work, no matter how good your column is. So take a look at the table on the slide. It outlines general guidelines for matching the mobile phases to different separation modes. For reverse phase, we typically use something like water and acetonitrile or methanol mix. We may add buffer to control pH, especially important for acidic or basic analytes. For ion exchange, for example, buffer strength and pH are even more critical. The buffer must support the ionization of the analyte and maintain the charge on the stationary phase. Next, in normal phase chromatography, we flip things. Organic solvents like hexane become the base, and we also may add something like some polar modifiers like IPA or acetonitrile that help with elution. For mixed mode columns, we often need to balance multiple things, for example, ionic and hydrophobic interactions. And this can involve careful adjustments of both buffer composition and organic content. Another factor to consider is detector compatibility. For example, if you're using LSD, CAD, or mass spec, you must avoid non-volatile salts. Instead, opt for volatile modifiers like formic acid, TFA, or ammonium formate. And finally, think about pH. The mobile phase pH must align with the pKa of your analyte to ensure proper ionization. And this affects retention, affects peak shape, and reproducibility. So in short, the mobile phase is not a one-size-fits-all decision. It should be selected based on separation mode, the chemical properties of your analyte, and detection method you're using. So the table on this slide is a just helpful reference when developing or troubleshooting a method. Let's now revisit gradient versus isocratic elution in more depth. Isocratic keeps the mobile phase composition constant. It's reliable, simple to develop, and ideal for analytes that are chemically similar. You'll get consistent retention times and stable baselines, which is great for UV detection or refraction index. But when you're dealing with analytes of varying polarity or complexity, gradient elution gives you more flexibility. And by changing the mobile phase during the run, usually, for example, increasing the organic content, you can retain both weakly and strongly eluting compounds efficiently. So it shortens the runtime and improves peak shapes across the board. The trade-off is that gradient methods usually require more optimization and to make sure consistency between systems, so require more time in method development in general. This slide shows a direct comparison of isocratic versus gradient elution using mixed mode prime sub-D column. We are looking at two analytes, N-acetyl D-tryptophan and octanoic acid. And the table here shows key performance metrics for each method. Under isocratic conditions, we actually achieved higher resolution between the peaks. That's important to note. It means that analytes were more distinctly separated from each other. On the other hand, the gradient method gives us sharper peaks. Peak width and symmetry were improved, which is great for quantification and higher through output, even though the resolution slightly dropped. And we can see that here. We injected these two compounds, same sample, same injection volume. We measured and recorded the same area. And we can see that when we use gradient method, the peak height was higher, right? So we achieved more narrower peaks, but resolution a little bit dropped. So the key takeaway here is use isocratic when resolution is your top priority, especially for compounds that elute closely. Use gradients if you're dealing with broader polarity ranges and want sharper, faster elution, even at the cost of a little resolution. And that's important, especially if, let's say, we have mixture of 10 to 15 compounds that we have to separate, but we want to keep method under 20 minutes. Using isocratic usually is very hard because gradient methods gives us sharper peaks, and usually if we want to achieve basal separation, that's the way to go. Here, we introduce the three key performance metrics that define how well your HPLC method is working. We have resolution. This tells us how well two peaks are separated from each other. It's crucial for both identification and quantification. Efficiency, related to how sharp or narrow the peaks are. The more efficient the system, the higher the theoretical plate number. Sensitivity also, this is your ability to detect low concentration for analytes, which is especially important in trace analysis. Now, if you look at the table on this slide, we have illustrated how various parameters influence each of these metrics. For example, column length improves resolution, but may reduce sensitivity due to peak broadening. Particle size has a strong positive impact on efficiency, but smaller particles increase system back pressure. Temperature can sharper peaks and improve also efficiency, but too much heat might degrade very sensitive compounds. Also, injection volume is key. Too much volume may distort peak shape and lower resolution. And of course, detector settings, like choosing the right wavelength or flow cell size, for example, for UV detection, directly impact your sensitivity. So the key here is balance. In method development, when you optimize one of these metrics, you often affect the others. So for instance, increasing resolution by lengthening the column may decrease sensitivity or increase runtime. So always think holistically. Your goal is a method that gives sufficient resolution, adequate sensitivity, and good peak shape without sacrificing speed or reproducibility. Here's just a visual comparison between 3 micron and 5 micron particle columns, both using the same size, same stationary phase, prime sub-100 column. The smaller 3 micron particle deliver better peak efficiency and sharper peaks because they create more theoretical plates. And we can see here, for 3 micron, our plate count number is way higher than for 5 micron particle for the same compounds. The downside is higher back pressure, but that also depends on the viscosity of your mobile phase. So if mobile phase is not too viscous and we can use 3 micron particles, that's always way to go. We'll always achieve better separations. So again, it's trade-off. If you need higher resolution and can manage the pressure, smaller particles are always way to go. This slide demonstrates how much buffers impact separation, especially on mixed mode columns. Here we are separating prednisolone and D-glucose pentacetate using LSD detection. Buffers affect the ionization state of your analyte, which changes how they interact with the stationary phase. And with mixed mode columns where multiple interactions happen at once, buffer composition and pH are even more influential. And we can see here, we have 6 different mixed mode columns and 3 different composition of mobile phases, where organic content or acetonitrile is same, 35%. We only changing the buffer concentration and pH. And we can see how that influences resolution between these 2 compounds depending on this change. And even the small change from pH 3 to pH 3.5 impacts resolution. So small factors we have to take into consideration, especially with mixed mode columns. Now, we are moving into method development, which is where everything we discussed so far, columns, mobile phases, elution modes, and detectors come together into a working optimized method. So we just develop simple step-by-step guide. So step 1 is defining what you're analyzing. Are your compounds small molecules like vitamins or amino acids? Are there proteins, polymers, or peptides? Then we have to consider the sample matrix. Are you working with plasma, supplements, food, or water? Knowing the matrix helps determine cleanup needs, sensitivity limits, and possible interference with our peaks of interest. So for example, I'm separating nicotinamide from blood serum. That's very different than separating caffeine in tea or preservative in shampoo. Once you know what your analyte is, you move on to choosing column chemistry or step 2. For example, reverse phase columns, great starting point for many small hydrophobic molecules. But if the analyte is highly polar or charged, you might need to use ion exchange, helic, or mixed mode column. Also think about column dimensions. Shorter columns give faster run, but lower resolution. And also remember this tip, match column selectivity to functional groups of your analyte. If your molecule is basic, look for a column, for example, with cation exchange capability. Next, in step 3, we build the mobile phase. We start simple, often a mixture of water and acetonitrile or methanol. Then additives like buffers or acid come next, based on analyte's pKa and your detector compatibility. For UV detection, for example, formic acid or phosphate buffers are very common. For example, for mass spec, we have to make sure that buffers are volatile, and we have to avoid non-volatile salts. So a good starting point might be something like, let's say, 70 to 30 ratio water to acetonitrile with 0.1% formic acid. Then we fine-tune from there. Now, in step 4, we choose our elution mode, isocratic or gradient elution. If your sample contains just, let's say, one analyte or analytes that are very similar, isocratic will usually work fine. But for more complex samples or analytes with wide range of polarities, gradient is almost always better. So the gradient just gives you flexibility. You can start with like weak compounds and elute strongly retaining compounds, and just ensuring that all components elute efficiently in a single run. Next, we move to fine-tuning. And here are the key variables to play with, one at a time. We start with pH. For example, this changes the ionization of the analyte and stationary phase. Or temperature, which affects resolution and can speed up your run. Flow rate directly impacts retention time, and pressure. Injection volume, too large of volume can distort peaks and overload the column. So we always have to take into consideration also the column capacity. So in this stage is all about just strategic adjustment. Try one variable at a time, observe the effect, document everything. And this type of stepwise process leads you to a method that's just precise, sensitive, and stable. And finally, once your method looks promising, it's time to reproduce it. You'll assess peak resolution, repeatability, retention time stability. For example, you can track standard deviation for retention times in areas across multiple injections and ideally on multiple days as well. So the goal is method that's not just good, but reproducible and rugged across all different runs, but also different systems. So in summary, method development is all about logic and structure. You start with the chemistry, build around it, and then optimize systematically. And as we'll see later in the next sessions, using mixed mode columns can often simplify this process when analytes are complex, saving us time and also saving money. Here's an application that demonstrates the advantage of mixed mode columns. We use here prime CB column to analyze hydrophobic quaternary amine. which can be sometimes challenging to be analyzed on traditional, let's say, reverse phase. Yes, this compound is hydrophobic, can be retained on reverse phase. But even though a lot of reverse phase columns have end camping, we sometimes have unwanted silanol activity where this positive charge of quaternary amine can interact with silanols and gives us bad peaks, gives us usually peak tailing. So one of the key benefits of mixed mode column is their ability to operate with multiple interaction mechanisms. And in this case, we have prime CB column that has reverse phase, but it also has positive charge. This positive charge helps shield these exposed silanols and prevent this peak tailing. That's why we can see here in the example, we have very sharp peaks. Another way, because we are operating now by hydrophobic and ion exclusion interaction, by adjusting the amount of organic solvent here, acetonitrile, and acid, TFA in the mobile phase, we can influence retention in two distinctive ways. So first, by decreasing, for example, organic solvent, we can strengthen interaction between compound and reverse phase portion of stationary phase, which means increasing retention. But we also have this acid influences ion exclusion functionality. So by increasing the amount of TFA in mobile phase, we can cover positive charges on the stationary phase and minimize repulsion between analyte and stationary phase. And in that way, we can also increase retention time. So this dual functionality just ensures we have sharp peaks, good retention time for analytes that would otherwise be difficult to achieve on traditional single mode columns. And this example just highlights the true advantage of mixed mode columns. They allows us for fine-tuning of both hydrophobic and ion exclusion interaction, in this case, just providing superior results for, especially for complex samples. This is a classic application, again, that showcases the power of mixed mode columns for complex separation. And using the PrimeSep 100 column, we successfully separated 12 underivatized amino acids in a single run. The PrimeSep 100 column combines reverse phase and ion exchange mode. We have negative charge on this column as well, enabling to separate amino acids through different mechanisms. One, neutral amino acids are separated via hydrophobic interaction in reverse phase mode. Basic amino acids like arginine and lysine are separated via cation exchange interaction, while acidic amino acids are effectively separated via anion exclusion. So this results in separation of 12 amino acids in a single run without need for derivatization. And this type of application would not be possible, something like this on traditional reverse phase column. And not only that, here we can see that we operated in two elution modes in a single run. So at the beginning, from 0 to 12 minutes, we are operating in isocratic mode. We're keeping our organic modifier constant, we're keeping sulfuric acid, ionic modifier constant as well. But then from 12 to 25 minutes, we have gradient, where we are increasing the amount of ionic modifier to elute strongly retaining compounds. So the ability to perform such a separation with a single mixed mode column just offers significant advantage in terms of both time and cost savings. So let's just quickly summarize what we covered today. We reviewed the key components of HPLC, such as pump, injector, column, detector, and data system. We explored column and mobile phase selection and how they need to be aligned with our analyte of interest. We compared also isocratic versus gradient elution, look at some key performance metrics, and walk through method development. Next session, we'll focus only on mixed mode chromatography and how combining this multiple retention mechanism gives you better control and separation for complex samples. Thank you all for your time today. If you have any questions or, for example, need help developing your own HPLC method, feel free to reach out. You can visit our website or email us or call us. And we are always happy to support you with column recommendations, troubleshooting, or custom method development. If you have any questions now, you can drop on chat or just ask any question. We'll move to Q&A part, and I look forward also to seeing you in the next session.